The way I remember my grandfather, and that's who this song is about, was that he was patient. I mean, you could make him mad, and the one way you could make him mad was messing with my grandmother. But that was about the only way you could make him mad. And he was not hard to please at all. I never was walking around on eggshells or anything like that. He was dedicated. But stories surfaced about how he had once been an alcoholic. And this was a side of him that I had never known. I remember one time my grandmother and my grandfather were having their 50th anniversary. I have my rabbits here. Oh, this is my girl. This is my button. Yeah. That's right. Crazy bunny lady who talks to her rabbits. Yes. And, speaking of rabbits and rabbit trails, back to the subject at hand. I remember their 50th wedding anniversary. My grandfather cried for the first time I had ever seen him. It was the first time It was the first time I had ever seen my grandfather cry. And I don't remember all he said, but he said basically that he couldn't believe how my grandmother had stuck with him. And then throughout my life, the pieces all came together about how he was an alcoholic and how they had lost their son, Buddy. So he would get drunk. He was an alcoholic, and I'd only heard like a few stories about my uncle. It was never really talked about. And how he had killed himself, or there was a horrific accident when he was about 13 or 14. And how my grandfather would sort of try to not take out his insecurities on Buddy as much as he would try. He saw the same insecurities in his son, and he would try to toughen him up in his weird drunken way. And one night he got to punching him in the stomach, and Buddy grabbed his Boy Scout stuff and was gonna leave. In that time, stay-at-home wives, most of them did not have a college education. There was not a lot my grandmother could do to retaliate against the alcoholism and the circumstances. But that day when Buddy was grabbing his Boy Scout stuff and heading out the door, she put her foot down and she told my grandfather, who staggered to the front door and was grunting all kinds of things about, I kicked him out. In not so many words, she said she called her son back in the house, and then she told him that he needed to go. That it was him that needed to leave. And my grandfather, at that point, he cut back on his drinking and realized that he didn't want to lose his family. That wasn't an option for him. And we live in a time when people are very self-absorbed, but they're not very reflective. And my grandfather had the gumption and the desire to change his course. And that's his legacy. That's what this song is about. He told his daughters, you're getting a college education. You're getting a college education first. Didn't want to raise victims. He had no intention of raising victims. And I remember one time my aunt had gotten herself into a marriage that was a bit with an aggressive husband, and I could remember my grandfather going there and talking to him and wanting to get to know him and working out in the yard with him, because he could see clearly. And I think that's another thing that happens when we make these mistakes and we make the effort to change the direction of our lives. We are now able to assess and to help. And that's his legacy. He didn't raise victims. And I think he could see the plight of my grandmother. And clearly, I think he could. He wasn't going to do that. But yeah, that's his legacy. And he was a totally different person. Totally different person. For me, I never saw any of that. My uncle, he had so many issues when he killed himself. He was bullied in school. My grandfather was trying his way to deal with that, I guess. And also during that time, they were showing the Vietnam War on the television, and it was gory and it was brutal, and my uncle wanted nothing to do with it, and they were drafting people into the war. So there were probably a lot of reasons that my uncle felt he couldn't reconcile with, and they lost him. But they kept going, and they were. I still miss them. I still miss my grand. I think of she just died last year, and I still think of her over a year ago. I still think of her every day, almost. Yeah, they were very important in my life, very stable in my life. So, yeah, that's the story. I have cats. You've heard of cat ladies. Well, I'm a bit weirder. I have rabbits, and I love them. But, hey, don't eat my photos.